Her alien scent was shunned by all, but for the human it wasn't a curse, it was the beginning of desire.
Martin Keller muttered a curse under his breath as the diagnostic panel on his ship flickered its final protest before going completely dark. The Wanderer had served him faithfully through smuggling runs, mining contracts, and more than a few mercenary jobs, but its power core had been coughing sparks for months. He had ignored the warnings, patching one conduit, here reinforcing another there, the way an old soldier treats aching joints with stubbornness and denial. Now the inevitable had arrived. The Wanderer was dead, and Martin was stranded on Nebulon 5, a desert planet at the ragged edge of Galactic Alliance territory. The outpost mechanic, a leathery-skinned Vexorian with 6 arms and a sense of humor as dry as the planet's air, had delivered the verdict without sympathy. 3 days minimum, maybe 4. And the cost, he had scribbled a number on his data pad and rotated it with one spindly arm. Martin had barked out a bitter laugh. It was highway robbery, but then everything on the frontier was highway robbery. Out here, survival itself came with a price tag. He kicked the side of his dead ship in frustration, dust puffing into the air around his boots. He had another job lined up at Dryan Outpost, a contract he couldn't afford to miss. His reputation as a reliable contractor was the only thing keeping him afloat in these remote systems. Missing a delivery meant forfeiting pay, losing trust, and in some cases, making enemies. None of those options were survivable in the Outer Rim. The only way forward was public transit. The words themselves made his stomach turn. For a man used to commanding his own vessel, boarding a rail line full of strangers felt like shackling himself. Still, Nebulon's infamous Skyrail stretched across the desert, a maglev artery connecting settlements like stitches in scarred flesh. It was his one option. The station was a cacophony of sound and color, alien merchants hawking dried kava roots, spiced sandworms, and vials of glowing liquid that looked only barely safe to drink. The crowd bustled, adapted to the planet's arid environment, scaled Zorions with heat-reflective hides, feathery-plumed Avex, who trilled in the high winds, and a scattering of Draconians, their horns wrapped in protective coverings. Amid them, Martin stood out. Humans always did. At 6'4", with shoulders broad from years of manual work and combat training, he loomed over the crowd. Sweat already coated his khaki shirt despite the climate control system humming weakly overhead. He fed his credit sheet into the automated dispenser. 1 ticket to Dryan Outpost, he said. The machine chirped and spat a thin metallic card. He slipped it into his pocket as the silver train slid silently into the station, levitating inches above its magnetic rails. The crowd surged forward. Martin adjusted the strap of his duffel bag and boarded near the rear. Inside, the train car was half full, and yet there was a strange emptiness. A radius of unoccupied seats clustered around one passenger. At the center sat a humanoid female, unlike any Martin had seen up close. She had turquoise skin that shimmered faintly under the train's lights, dotted with freckles like silver constellations across her arms and cheeks. Instead of hair, delicate tendrils, the color of liquid platinum, cascaded down her back, moving with a subtle grace as though alive. Fin-like membranes framed her ears, marking her unmistakably as Aquarian. But it was not her appearance alone that created the void around her. It was the way others leaned away, wrinkling noses, muttering in alien dialects. Even the boldest traders had chosen to stand rather than occupy the vacant space near her. Her expression told the story, chin-lowered, shoulders tense, a mask of practiced resignation. She knew why. Martin's eyes lingered for a moment longer than they should have. Then, with deliberate steps, he crossed the aisle and gestured toward the empty seat beside her. This taken, his voice was casual, even warm. The Aquarian blinked, startled, her large iridescent eyes widening. "No, but you might not want to." Her tone was soft, melodic, uncertain. Martin set his duffel at his feet and sat anyway. "I'm Martin," he offered simply, "headed to Dryan." She hesitated, her slender fingers tugging at the hem of her beige top. At last she said, "I'm Lagra, and I should apologize in advance. My scent, it drives others away." Always. Martin inhaled, catching it for the first time now that she mentioned it. Not unpleasant, not to him. A briny tang, oceanic, carrying memories of tides and salt spray. Instead of revulsion, nostalgia swept through him like a tide. You smell like the Atlantic coast back on Earth, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I grew up in a fishing village in Maine. My father and grandfather worked the boats. That scent, it reminds me of home. Her posture shifted instantly, the tension in her frame loosening as if he had just unlocked a door no one else had dared to approach. Truly, you're not just being polite. Trust me, Martin replied with a dry chuckle. I'm rarely accused of politeness. For the first time, she smiled, a real smile, luminous and shy all at once. I am Aquarian. My people evolved in the oceans of Nixia. Our skin produces protective oils. Most species consider them foul, but it is part of us as natural as breathing. Martin studied her, intrigued. Out here on a desert world that must feel like exile. Her eyes lit faintly. I am a hydrologist. The Planetary Council hired me to locate underground aquifers. Nebulon hides water beneath its bones, and my kind can sense it. He whistled softly, impressed despite himself. A rare talent, more useful than smelling like fish bait, I'd say. She laughed, a sound like bells chiming over water. Others glanced their way again, some frowning at the spectacle of a human sitting willingly beside an Aquarian. A draconian across the aisle snorted in open disapproval. Martin ignored them. Some folks just can't stand seeing others comfortable, he murmured. It is unusual, she admitted, lowering her gaze. I have traveled much. I am always alone during transit. No one ever chooses the seat beside me. Martin leaned back, his voice low and steady. Guess I'm not like most people. For a moment, silence stretched between them, but not the uncomfortable kind. It was weighted, fragile, almost intimate. The train chimed, approaching Crimson Canyon Station. Prepare for brief stop, Lagra shifted, gathering her satchel. This is my transfer point. I must take the eastern line to the research outpost. Martin felt a surprising pang. Shame. Ride was just getting interesting. She hesitated, then drew a small holographic card from her pouch and pressed it into his palm. If you are ever near Dryan again. Her freckles pulsed faintly, as though betraying an emotion she tried to hide. The train jolted violently, cutting her words short. Lights flickered, passengers cried out. Martin reacted instantly, catching her by the waist before she could fall. The car shuddered again, and the overhead lamps went dark, replaced by crimson emergency strobes. The train had stopped, but not gently. Something was wrong. That, Martin growled, keeping his arms steady around her, wasn't a scheduled stop. Panic rose among the passengers. Martin's instincts, honed from years in the Earth Defense Force, screamed that this was no malfunction. Power fluctuations followed by system failures. In this sequence, it was sabotage. He glanced at Lagra. Her iridescent eyes reflected the crimson light. For the first time since he'd met her, fear clouded them. What's happening? She asked, voice low but steady. Martin shifted his weight, his mind already cataloging exits, vulnerabilities, potential threats. Nothing good. Stay close. The metallic scrape of something tearing into the roof echoed through the car. Passengers shrieked. Martin reached into his boot, withdrawing a compact multi-tool that doubled as a weapon. Raiders. He could smell it in the air as surely as Lagra smelled the water buried beneath rock. In that instant, Martin understood something fundamental. This woman, avoided by everyone else, had just become his responsibility. He wasn't entirely sure why. But as the roof above them groaned and the first sparks fell, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He would fight through hell itself before letting her be taken. The grinding noise above them deepened, metallic teeth tearing into the armored roof of the passenger car. Sparks cascaded down like fiery rain as the ceiling buckled. Shouts turned into panicked cries. Some passengers scrambled to the aisles, others cowered beneath their seats. The crimson glow of the emergency lights painted every face in bloody hues. Martin rose to his full height, steadying Lagra behind him with a firm hand. Everyone get low, away from the windows, he barked his command, voice honed on battlefields long past. The authority in his tone cut through the chaos, and several passengers obeyed instinctively. Even the draconian who had sneered earlier sank back into his seat horns, trembling. Lagra's tendrils fluttered anxiously, brushing against Martin's arm. Who would attack a passenger line? Raiders, he answered grimly. Sand pirates. Out here they hit transports, strip them for parts, sell passengers into slavery. His gaze flicked to her turquoise skin. Exotic species fetch higher prices. Her freckles pulsed with alarm, a faint shimmer across her cheeks. She whispered, then they will target me. Martin's jaw tightened. Not while I'm breathing. The roof split open with a shriek, and three masked figures dropped into the car, their energy weapons glowing a sickly red. They wore desert garb, scarves wrapped around faces, goggles reflecting the crimson emergency lights, armor patched together from scrap. Raiders. Stay down and no one gets hurt. One of them shouted, swinging his rifle toward the crowd. Martin didn't hesitate. He surged forward like a coiled spring unleashed, slamming his duffel bag into the nearest raider. The weapon fired, scorching a line across the ceiling, but Martin's momentum drove the man back into a row of seats. With practiced precision, Martin followed with a brutal elbow strike, sending the raider sprawling. The second attacker raised his blaster, but Lagra moved with surprising speed. There she cried, pointing as vibrations in the air betrayed the man's intent. Martin ducked just before the bolt sizzled past his head. He tackled the raider, wrenching the weapon free. The third opened fire, wildly, bolts scattering sparks from the train walls. Screams erupted from the passengers. Martin yanked Lagra behind an overturned seat, shielding her with his body. You all right? Her voice trembled, but held steady. Yes. You fight as though this is not your first time. 7th Tactical Response. Earth Defense Force, he muttered, ejecting the half-spent cartridge from the stolen weapon. I've seen worse boarding actions than this. The raider he'd floored earlier staggered up, blood dripping from beneath his mask. Martin leveled the blaster and fired. The man collapsed in a crackle of energy, unconscious but alive. Martin wasn't here to slaughter, just to protect. The other passengers watched in awe. Some, emboldened by his example, began grabbing improvised weapons, seat struts, emergency fire extinguishers, even luggage. Martin felt a flicker of pride. Fear could paralyze, but courage was contagious. Still, they were far from safe. More grinding echoed from the roof, and Martin's instincts screamed there were more raiders outside. Through the cracked window, he glimpsed sleek hoverbikes circling the stalled train, their riders like vultures waiting for scraps. We can't stay here, he said to Lagra. They'll breach every car. We need to move the passengers. The emergency exit, she offered, pointing to the rear door. A draconian laborer yanked at the handle, roaring in frustration. It's jammed. We're trapped. Stand back. Martin knelt by the panel, pulling his multi-tool from his boot. His hands moved with deft precision, bypassing circuits, hot wiring locks. Sparks leapt as wires touched. Beside him, Lagra crouched low, her voice a whisper, close to his ear. I can sense vibrations in the air. I will warn you if they approach. Her nearness was distracting, the cool scent of salt and sea wrapping around him, the way her tendrils brushed his shoulder like curious fingers. He forced his focus back to the panel. Seconds stretched, every heartbeat a countdown. Then click. The lock disengaged. Got it? Everyone threw quietly and quick. Passengers scrambled into the coupling between cars, fear propelling them forward. Martin guided them, keeping Lagra close. The hiss of cutting torches echoed from behind raiders breaching the roof they just left. One elderly Vexorian merchant hesitated, trembling. Why? Why risk yourself for us human? Martin met his gaze coldly. Because I'm not most humans. Then the roof gave way, and more raiders dropped inside. Martin shoved Lagra through the exit and slammed the door behind them. A bolt of plasma scorched the wall where his head had been a heartbeat earlier. He jammed the multi-tool back into the lock, buying precious seconds. They rushed into the next car, mercifully empty. The train swayed, half-dead systems whining in protest. Outside, the desert stretched endless and merciless dunes glowing under twin suns. Hoverbikes shadowed them, still their riders hungry. They will not stop, Lagra whispered, her freckles shimmering. They will strip this train, take prisoners. Then we fight smarter. Martin's mind raced. He scanned the car, assessing. Seats could be torn free for barricades. Overhead piping could be fashioned into staves. The passengers who had followed him clutched their makeshift weapons, waiting. Fear still glittered in their eyes, but there was resolve now, too. Martin turned to Lagra. I'll need you at my side. You've got skills we don't. She tilted her head, tendrils swaying. I am not a soldier. You don't have to be. You're calm under pressure and you see things others don't. That's enough. Her lips curved into a small, almost incredulous smile. No one has ever said that to me before. He shrugged. First time for everything. Another impact rocked the train as raiders tried forcing their way into the adjoining car. Martin steadied himself, weapon in hand. He glanced at Lagra, standing close, her silver-flecked skin glowing faintly in the emergency lights. In her eyes, he saw not fear now, but something else, trust. The barricade shuddered under the raiders' assault. Martin raised his weapon, voice sharp and steady. Hold the line. They think we're easy prey. Let's prove them wrong. The passengers tightened their grips, shoulders squaring. Lagra stood beside him, her hand brushing his arm, cool and steady as the tide. For an instant, the chaos around them faded, and Martin felt something he hadn't in years. Not just duty, but purpose. The door exploded inward. Raiders stormed through. The battle for survival began. The second wave of raiders crashed against their makeshift barricade like a sandstorm slamming into stone. Sparks burst as plasma bolts tore through the car, cutting gouges into the metal walls. Martin moved like a machine, years of training, guiding every motion. He swung the metal strut he'd fashioned into a weapon, knocking one attacker sprawling, then dropped low to sweep another's legs out from under him. The passengers, emboldened, fought alongside him, swinging pipes, throwing improvised missiles, tackling raiders with a ferocity born of desperation. Through it all, Lagra remained by his side. When a raider tried to flank Martin, she sensed the vibrations of his movement before he appeared, crying out a warning that gave Martin the half-second edge he needed to counter. Her calm steadied the frightened, her presence a quiet flame in the chaos. The tide turned. The raiders faltered, realizing their easy prey had teeth. With curses and shouted commands, they began retreating back through the breached door. For a heartbeat, relief washed over the passengers. They had survived. But then the train lurched violently, throwing everyone to the floor. A grinding hum rose beneath their feet, deep and resonant. Emergency lights flickered blue, pulsing in rhythm with the shuddering of the engines. What now? A draconian laborer roared, scrambling upright. Captain Threll's voice echoed through the intercom, brittle with fear. Emergency protocol engaged. Train accelerating, full speed, returned to Crimson Canyon Station. Martin's blood ran cold. Full emergency speed. What's that? Threll stumbled into the car, his face pale. 320 kilometers per hour. And the track ahead? His voice cracked. The sensors detected a massive break before Crimson Canyon. That's why we stopped originally. If we hit it at full speed, the implications needed no explanation. Lagra's freckles flickered nervously as she turned to Martin. The train will plunge into the canyon. Before Martin could repeat, a new sound rose above the rumble of the accelerating engines. A roar, deep, primal, vibrating the very air. The passengers froze, every head turning toward the windows. From the sands behind them, a massive shadow burst forth, throwing dunes into the sky. The creature that emerged dwarfed the train, a serpentine body armored in scales that gleamed like burnished copper beneath the twin suns. 6 massive limbs propelled it forward with terrifying speed, its maw opening to reveal rows of jagged teeth large enough to shear a starship in half. Sand Leviathan, Threll whispered, his voice trembling, awakened by the vibrations, an apex predator of Nebulon's deserts. The Leviathan reared back and loosed a roar that shook the very bones of the passengers. The sound carried across the dunes a promise of death. Martin steadied himself against a wall, staring at the monstrosity. Of course, he muttered, because things weren't bad enough already. The Leviathan lunged, closing the distance effortlessly, its armored body undulating like a tidal wave of flesh and scale. It struck at the rear of the train, jaws clamping down on the last car. Metal screamed as the Leviathan ripped it free, tossing it aside like scrap. Passengers screamed. Lagra pressed close to Martin, her wide eyes reflecting the crimson-blue glow of the emergency lights. It will consume us all. Not if I have anything to say about it, Martin growled. He sprinted to his duffel bag and unzipped it with practiced urgency. Inside lay a weapon he had hoped to keep hidden, a military-grade pulse rifle contraband for civilians, but essential in the Outer Rim. He slammed a power cell into place, the weapon humming to life with a satisfying whine. The Leviathan surged closer, its gaping maw filling the window. Martin braced the rifle and fired 3 controlled bursts directly into the creature's open mouth. Blue energy crackled, searing its sensitive flesh. The monster recoiled with a roar of agony, thrashing against the sands. The train rocked violently, nearly tipping. Martin gritted his teeth. He knew the shots hadn't killed it, only bought them seconds. Martin Lagra called from the front. She stood at the control console, her slender hands moving rapidly across the damaged interface. "We've restored partial manual control, but the braking systems are locked." "Then we find another way," Martin shouted back. The canyon loomed ahead, a gash in the earth stretching wide and deep. The train hurtled toward it with unstoppable momentum. Behind them, the Leviathan roared again, already recovering, charging after its prey. Martin sprinted forward, gripping the railing to steady himself as the car swayed. Options, he demanded. Lagra pressed her hands flat to the floor, her freckles glowing in a rapid pattern. "Wait, there is water below us, deep, vast. A hidden aquifer beneath the canyon floor." Martin blinked. "You're sure?" "My people can sense water through solid rock. It is directly below the canyon. If we strike the right point, the water could cushion our fall." Cushion? Martin barked out a laugh, half mad with adrenaline. "Lady, we're on a metal coffin, going 300 clicks an hour. But hell, it's better than splattering on rock." Captain Thrall shook his head frantically. "It's suicide. Even if you survive the fall of the Leviathan." Martin cut him off with a glare. "You got a better plan." Silence. Martin turned back to Lagra. "All right, you guide me to where we need to hit. I'll handle everything else." Their eyes locked, intensity thrumming between them. In that moment, with death thundering behind and doom yawning ahead, everything else fell away. Lagra's freckles pulsed brighter. She stepped closer, so close, Martin could feel the cool radiance of her skin, the scent of ocean filling his senses. "In my culture," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engines, "we share life energy before facing death. It increases the chance of survival." Martin's breath caught. "And how exactly do we share that?" Her tendrils curled gently around his neck and shoulders, like this. She kissed him, not the hesitant brush of lips from earlier, but a consuming, desperate kiss that ignited every nerve in his body. Her cool, slightly saline taste sent electricity surging through him, flooding his veins with vitality. For a heartbeat, he forgot the Leviathan, the canyon, the screaming passengers. There was only her glowing silver in the dim light, tethered to him as though they were the last 2 beings in existence. When she pulled back, her freckles were blazing like stars. "Now go," she whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and resolve. Martin nodded, heart hammering. He rushed to the coupling between the cars, fingers flying across the decoupling system. His plan was insane, but insanity was all they had left. "Captain," he shouted, "when I signal engage every brake we've got on the front section, you'll kill us all. Trust me." Lagra pressed herself against the forward window, eyes closed, body glowing with bioluminescence as she focused. "There," she murmured, "the darker patch of rock, that is where the aquifer runs shallowest. Aim us for that." The Leviathan struck again, its claws raking across the train's rear, tearing another car free. Martin triggered the emergency decoupler. Explosive bolts fired, separating the last 3 cars. The sudden reduction in weight jolted the train forward even faster, but behind them, the Leviathan pounced on the decoupled section, tearing it apart in a frenzy. "Bought us a few seconds," Martin muttered, racing back to the front. The canyon edge yawned before them, impossibly wide, impossibly deep. Lagra's eyes snapped open, locking with his. Now, Martin lunged for the manual override muscles, straining as he forced the battered system to respond. Metal screamed in protest. The train tilted, nose-dipping toward the canyon floor. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then gravity claimed them. The train plummeted into the abyss. Passengers screamed. Martin wrapped his arms around Lagra, bracing them both against the console, her tendrils entwining with his fingers. The last thing he saw before impact was her face freckles, blazing like constellations, eyes filled with perfect trust. Then blackness. Cold. That was the first sensation. A shocking, suffocating cold that dragged Martin Keller violently back to consciousness. He gagged water filling his lungs before strong hands gripped his shoulders and hauled his head above the surface. Breathe, Lagra's voice rang in his ears, strangely amplified by the cavern around them. Martin coughed violently, spewing out water chest burning. His vision blurred, then cleared. They were inside what remained of the front car, half submerged, tilting at an angle. Blue emergency lights flickered against dark stone walls, their glow reflected in water that rushed steadily through shattered windows. Passengers scrambled through the roof's hatch, some helping others, some in blind panic. Captain Threll barked orders, his tone brittle, but holding enough command presence to herd the survivors. Martin tried to push himself upright, but pain lanced through his leg. He hissed, looking down. A jagged gash tore across his thigh, blood darkening the water. Lagra immediately dropped beside him, her turquoise hands already moving with surprising skill. "Not broken," she murmured, tearing a strip from her own tunic, exposing a stretch of shimmering skin as she bound the wound. "But deep. The bleeding will worsen if untreated." Martin gave a strained chuckle despite the pain. Fashionable battlefield medicine. She glanced up, freckles pulsing faintly in something like embarrassment. "Your humor in this moment is unusual." "Humor's all that keeps me alive sometimes," he replied. Though the truth was, her nearness steadied him more than any joke. A thunderous roar cut through the cavern, the sound vibrating through the water. Ripples spread across the surface. The passengers froze. Lagra's expression darkened. "The Leviathan, it followed us down." Martin clenched his jaw. Of course it did. He forced himself to his feet, leaning on the wall. "We need high ground. Fast." Lagra closed her eyes, hands brushing the rock. After a moment she pointed. "There, 50 meters, a ledge that leads to tunnels." The survivors began moving, slipping into the water. Martin followed, supported by Lagra. She moved with supernatural grace, her body cutting through the water, effortlessly guiding him. He marveled even through pain at her strength. She was not fragile as she looked. Halfway across, Martin felt something brush his injured leg. He glanced down and swore. Small, eel-like shapes circled in the water, bioluminescent patterns glowing along their sleek bodies. Their teeth glinted in flashes of blue light. Cave eels, Lagra hissed, venomous, attracted to blood. Martin swung his boot, kicking one aside, but more came swirling closer. The Leviathan's shadow loomed deeper in the lake, drawn to the commotion. Panic threatened to seize him. Then Lagra pressed close, her body against his. "Trust me," she whispered. From her arms, pores released a shimmering cloud of iridescent particles. It enveloped them in a glowing haze. The eels scattered instantly, fleeing as though repelled. Martin blinked in astonishment. What the hell was that? "Defensive secretion," she explained breathlessly as she pulled him toward the ledge. "My scent, the one others loathe. It is part of the same system. To predators, it is poison." Martin managed a strained laugh. "Guess it saved my ass. Twice now." They hauled themselves into the rocky shelf just as the Leviathan's massive head breached the surface, jaws snapping where they had been seconds earlier. Its roar shook loose pebbles from the cavern ceiling. On trembling legs, survivors scrambled toward the tunnel entrance. Martin and Lagra followed last water, streaming off them. The Leviathan thrashed below, enraged but too large to climb. For now they were safe. The tunnel sloped upward, narrow and winding. Lagra's natural glow lit the way, her freckles shimmering softly, casting the walls in silver-blue light. They moved deeper until the passage widened into an alcove. Martin staggered, his wound bleeding heavily again. Lagra caught him before he fell. "You need to rest," she insisted, lowering him against the wall. She unwrapped the blood-soaked bandage, examining the wound with concern. "Cave eel venom, it prevents clotting." Martin gritted his teeth. "Feels like my leg's on fire." "I can help," she said, her voice low. She placed her palms gently on his thigh. A thin layer of iridescent fluid seeped from her skin, coating the wound. Immediately, the burning pain faded, replaced by a tingling rush that spread throughout his body. Martin gasped. What is that?" "A healing compound my species secretes," she said softly. Her eyes widened as she saw his reaction. but it affects you differently. Differently was an understatement. Every nerve in his body lit up hypersensitive waves of sensation, radiating outward from her touch. His heart pounded, breath coming shallow. Heat and pleasure mingled with the relief of pain vanishing. His body's reaction was undeniable. Legra saw it too. Her freckles flashed bright, unmistakably a blush in her kind. Oh, she whispered, tendrils curling in flustered uncertainty. That is, unexpected. Martin managed to laugh, though his voice was husky. You could say that. Their eyes met, the air between them charged. Her hand still rested on his thigh, her touch lingering. Among my people, she said softly, there are legends of compatible species, rare bonds where biochemistry resonates. They say such connections are transcendent. Martin's hand rose, tracing her jaw. Is that what this is? I don't know, she confessed, leaning into his touch. But I want to find out. Their lips met again. Not desperate this time, but deep, lingering, filled with discovery. Energy pulsed through their connection, her freckles blazing like constellations. Martin felt her tendrils wrap around his shoulders, each point of contact sparking another surge of sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she whispered, that was only the beginning. Before Martin could answer, a low rumble shook the cavern. They turned. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, and what they saw stole their breath. An underground city sprawled before them, carved directly into the cavern walls. Towering structures rose like coral formations, flowing in organic, glowing with bioluminescent veins of blue water that threaded through channels in the stone. A central pool shimmered with living light, illuminating everything with ethereal radiance. Legra staggered forward, awe flooding her features. By the seven seas, it's real. Martin followed, limping, but captivated. What is this place? An ancient Aquarian outpost, she breathed. Her freckles pulsed in excitement. My people have legends. That Nebulon was once an ocean world before catastrophe dried the surface. I never believed. She knelt at the pool's edge, tracing symbols etched into the stone symbols that mirrored the patterns on her skin. This city was built by my ancestors. The water, it's alive, infused with the same bioluminescent compounds we produce. This is history. Martin crouched beside her, fingers brushing the carved stone. Looks like more than history. Looks like technology. Her tendrils trembled with wonder. If I can interface with it, I may awaken what remains. Before she could try, voices echoed from above. Ropes dropped through a gap in the ceiling. Armed figures descended. Sand raiders. And at their head, Captain Threll. Martin's blood boiled. You. Threll's sneer was unmistakable. Secure the chamber, the waterfinder is here. Lagra froze. Waterfinder. Martin's eyes narrowed. He means you. Threll leveled a stolen pulse rifle. With your abilities and this technology, I'll control every drop of water on this planet. Do you know what that's worth? Martin stepped forward, placing himself between Threll and Lagra. So this was your game. Sabotage the train, sell out the passengers, then deliver her to your corporate masters. Call it what you like, Threll spat, but I'll be king of this desert. Now stand aside. Martin's grip tightened on his weapon. The city around them pulsed with living light, as though waiting for a command. He glanced back at Lagra. She met his eyes, understanding, sparking silently between them. No words were needed. Together they prepared to resist. The battle for the ancient city was about to begin. The ancient chamber seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat walls, alive with veins of glowing water. The raiders fanned out quickly, weapons raised their boots, splashing across the shallow edge of the central pool. Martin shifted his stance, pulse rifle steady, his body angled protectively in front of Legra. Threll's voice cut sharp across the cavern. Drop your weapon, Keller. You can't protect her. Even you must realize when the odds are impossible. Martin smirked humorlessly. Impossible's sort of my specialty. A ripple of unease passed through the raiders. They'd seen him fight on the train. They knew he wasn't just a desperate contractor. He was something more dangerous. But Threll raised a gauntleted fist, snarling, he bleeds like anyone else. Take him. The first raider surged forward. Martin fired a controlled burst. The man collapsed, twitching. The others hesitated, then opened fire in a flurry of red bolts. Martin dove behind a carved stone column, return fire scorching the air. Splashes of energy hissed as they struck the glowing water channels. Beside him, Legra pressed her palms against the pedestal at the pool's edge. Her freckles glowed brighter as the patterns on the stone lit in response. "It recognizes me," she whispered in wonder. "The system, it knows Aquarian touch." Martin gritted his teeth, firing again. "Then tell it to hurry up and recognize we're in trouble." The raiders advanced in a tightening arc, driving Martin and Lagra toward the pool. Martin fired until the rifle's charge sputtered dry. He hurled it like a club, catching one raider in the faceplate. Then he yanked a jagged stone loose and wielded it like a knife. Legra cried out, "Martin, buy me time." "On it!" He charged forward, ramming his shoulder into the nearest raider, sending both sprawling into the shallow water. The fluid clung strangely, glowing brighter where it touched skin and armor. The raider screamed as tendrils of liquid wrapped around his limbs, hardening instantly. Within seconds, he was encased frozen mid-struggle in glowing crystallized water. Martin staggered back in shock. "What the hell?" Lagra's voice rang with awe. "It responds to threats. The water is alive." The others recoiled, fear flickering across their eyes. But Threll snarled, firing a bolt that scorched across Martin's shoulder. Pain seared through him, but he kept his footing. "Keep him busy," Threll barked. He advanced on Lagra, weapon aimed. "You girls step away from the controls. You don't understand what you're handling." Legra lifted her chin, freckles blazing. "I understand enough. You see water as profit. My people see it as life." Threll sneered. "Life doesn't pay dividends." He lunged. Martin tackled him before he reached her. They crashed to the stone floor, fists flying, grappling like feral beasts. Threll was stronger than he looked, years of frontier brutality giving his blows weight. But Martin fought with something deeper, rage duty, the fire of someone who had already decided he'd die before letting Lagra fall. They slammed against the pedestal. Energy flared, sending both sprawling. Legra seized the moment, her tendrils curling as she focused, her palms pressed flat. The holographic map above the pedestal expanded, revealing the aquifer network spanning the entire planet. Columns of light erupted across the chamber as systems long dormant awoke. The raiders faltered, blinded by the brilliance. Some fled toward the ropes they had descended on. Others fired wildly, bolts striking walls that drank the energy harmlessly. Then a roar shook the cavern. The water churned violently, waves crashing against the stone ledges. The Leviathan erupted from the pool, its massive head rising like a nightmare-made flesh. Its scales blazed with reflected light, its maw dripping with bioluminescent water. Screams tore from the raiders. The beast followed us. Threll staggered to his feet, eyes wide. No, it can't be." But Martin understood instantly. This wasn't coincidence. The Leviathan wasn't just a predator. It was bound to this place, an ancient guardian awakened to protect the city. The monster's jaws snapped, crushing a fleeing raider in an instant. Others scrambled, their weapons useless against the armored hide. Martin dragged himself upright, spitting blood, his eyes locking on Lagra. She stood at the heart of it all, glowing brighter than he'd ever seen her, freckles pulsing in harmony with the living water. The Leviathan roared again, but its gaze fixed not on her with hunger, but with recognition. "Martin," she shouted over the chaos, "I can calm it. The system channels through me, but I need you to hold them off." He wiped sweat and blood from his eyes, raising his makeshift blade. "Then let's give this ancient thing a reason to listen." Threll came at him again, screaming in fury, pulse knife flashing. They clashed in brutal close combat blades, sparking fists, breaking skin. Around them, raiders died, screaming in the Leviathan's jaws, or fled into the tunnels. Martin's legs screamed with pain, but adrenaline pushed him beyond his limits. He slammed his head into Threll's faceplate, shattering the visor. The man reeled, dazed. Martin rammed the stone shard into the joint of his armor, sending him howling to the ground. "Should have stayed on your train," Captain Martin snarled. Behind him, Lagra cried out. Her body arched as energy surged through her, light streaming from her skin into the pedestal. The chamber shook violently as the entire aquifer network activated. Veins of glowing water shot outward, tunnels, illuminating like arteries, pumping lifeblood back into a dead body. The Leviathan reared back, loosing a roar that made stalactites crash from the ceiling. Then slowly it lowered its massive head toward Lagra. She stepped forward, unflinching, her hand outstretched. By the seas that birthed us, she whispered, I am of your kin. Guard us not as prey, but as heirs. The Leviathan froze, then impossibly it bowed its armored head. Gasps rose from the survivors. Even Martin faltered, staring in disbelief. The living water surged higher, wrapping around the remaining raiders. They thrashed helplessly as the liquid hardened, encasing them like statues in glowing amber. Thorell staggered, bleeding, only to be caught in the tide. He screamed until his mouth filled with light. Then silence. The chamber calmed. The Leviathan sank back into the pool, coiling around the city like a sentinel. The ancient systems hummed in harmony with Lagra's glowing body. Martin staggered forward, his chest heaving, until he stood beside her. He placed a bloodied hand on her shoulder. You did it. Her eyes shone, tendrils curling gently around his wrist. No, we did. Above them, the ceiling groaned. With a deep rumble, panels retracted, revealing the night sky of Nebulon 5. Beams of blue light shot into the heavens, signaling across the planet. Martin wrapped an arm around her waist as they watched. What's happening? The system is awakening, she whispered. Other outposts are coming online. The water is returning. Nebulon will live again. For a long moment, the cavern was silent, except for the hum of the reborn city. Survivors huddled together, whispering in awe. Martin leaned close, his voice low enough only she could hear. You realize you've just changed the future of an entire world. Her freckles glowed softly as she met his gaze. No, Martin, we did. And in the reflected glow of living water, with the echoes of battle still hanging heavy in the air, Martin knew one thing for certain. He would fight through an army, through hell itself, for this woman and the world she was bound to save. 3 months later, Nebulon 5 no longer looked like the same world. Where once endless dunes had rolled under twin suns, channels of glowing blue water now cut across the desert, carving life into death. Canals shimmered in the evening light, their banks lined with the first stubborn green shoots. For the first time in living memory, clouds gathered above the horizon, heavy with promise. Martin Keller leaned against the railing of a balcony, arms folded across his broad chest. The outpost sprawled below him, a patchwork of new construction rising from old dust. Alien species of every stripe worked shoulder to shoulder, guided by an energy Martin hadn't seen in years. Hope. The door behind him slid open with a soft hiss. He didn't need to turn. He knew the sound of her footsteps, the faint chime of tendrils brushing fabric, making the subtle ocean scent that lingered in her wake. You're brooding, Lagra teased gently as she stepped out onto the balcony. The fading light painted her turquoise skin in hues of gold and silver. Her freckles pulsed with a soft rhythm, a heartbeat he had learned to read as easily as her voice. Martin gave a grunt, half smile tugging at his lips. Just thinking, not used to watching deserts turn green in real time. She moved beside him, her fingers brushing his arm before resting lightly on the railing. The Southern Hemisphere reports came in this morning. 87% of the ancient systems are operational. Within a year, Nebulon will have sustainable surface water. Martin let out a low whistle. From a dust ball to a garden. All thanks to you. Her tendrils curled around his forearm, affectionate. Thanks to us. You forget too easily what you did. Without your stubbornness, your courage, we would all be buried in sand or worse. He turned, studying her face in the soft twilight. I've been called stubborn my whole life. Guess it finally paid off. She smiled, freckles pulsing brighter. It paid off the moment you chose to sit beside me on that train. For a while, they stood in silence, watching the first true sunset reflected in water. It was a sight neither of them would forget, a dead world reborn. Martin finally spoke. And what about our research project? Lagra's eyes sparkled, mischief dancing in their depths. Ah yes, the scientific community is fascinated. Our case study is the most requested file in the galactic database. The compatibility between human and Aquarian physiology unprecedented. Martin grinned, slipping an arm around her waist. Case study, huh? Sounds clinical. We should probably gather more data for science. She laughed, the sound like water over stones. Always the diligent researcher. Her tendrils curled around his neck, pulling him down into a kiss. The connection was no less electric than the first time. Every touch still sent sparks racing across his skin. Every moment still felt like drowning in something too vast and too vital to ever let go. When they finally broke apart, she leaned against his chest, freckles glowing contentment. Do you ever think she murmured how strange it is that what others flee from my scent? My biology was the thing that drew you to me. Martin kissed her forehead. Sometimes the universe works backwards to get things right. The thing everyone else hated is exactly what reminded me of home. And home's something I've been missing for a long time. Her eyes softened. Then perhaps you found it here. Before Martin could reply, a chime interrupted them. Lagra's wrist console projected a holographic display. Reports streamed in from across the planet. She frowned, scrolling. What is it? Martin asked. Signal transmissions, she said slowly. Not just from Nebulon, from other locations across the rim. It seems, when we activated the ancient systems, a secondary protocol engaged. Translation. Her freckles pulsed rapidly, excitement tinged with unease. The city sent out a signal, a beacon, not just planetary, galactic. Martin's brows furrowed. Calling who? Or what she whispered. My people have legends of Aquarian colonies scattered across the stars long thought lost. If they still exist, they may have heard the call. Martin let out a low breath gaze, turning skyward where faint stars pricked the indigo sky. So we didn't just wake up Nebulon. We may have woken up an entire civilization. Silence stretched between them, heavy with possibilities. Lagra finally reached for his hand, tendrils curling with a silent promise. Whatever comes, we will face it together. Martin squeezed her hand. Damn right. They stood that way until the first drops of rain began to fall. The sound was soft, hesitant, as though the planet itself was relearning how to breathe. Then the drizzle grew into a steady downpour, the first true rain in centuries. Below, workers and settlers lifted their faces, cheering, laughing, weeping openly as water cascaded down their bodies. Children splashed in the forming puddles. Even the stern draconians tilted their heads back to drink. Martin held Lagra close, her skin cool against his, her scent mingling with the rain. Well, he said softly, looks like Nebulon decided to give us a blessing. Her freckles glowed brightly as she leaned into him. In Aquarian culture, we have a saying, the tide brings what is meant to find you. Martin pressed his lips to her temple. Guess I was the tide this time. She smiled, her tendrils brushing his cheek. No, Martin. We are the tide, together. The storm poured harder, but neither moved. Wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by rebirth, they let the water wash away everything that had come before. For Martin Keller, once a soldier, once a wanderer, home was no longer a place. It was turquoise skin under starlight, freckles, glowing like constellations, the scent of salt and sea on a world that had never known oceans. For Lagra, once shunned, once a lone home was a man who sat beside her when no one else dared, who saw beauty where others recoiled, who fought through hell to keep her safe. And for Nebulon 5, once barren, once forgotten home was water returning at last. The galaxy would take notice. The beacon had already been sent. New challenges, new dangers, new discoveries would come. But in that moment, beneath the first rains in millennia, none of that mattered. What mattered was simple. They had found each other, and together they were unstoppable.